Between 1870 and 1884, Wells Fargo stagecoaches were robbed 313 times. Every last heist combined netted Outlaws maybe $3 million. During those same 14 years, a single narrow-gauge railroad line in Colorado moved over $300 million in silver ore. The Wild West wasn't won by men with guns. It was won by machines that could haul 80 tons up a 4% grade. And the machine that did it was a locomotive most people have never heard of. It was called the Consolidation. Here's what the numbers actually say about who built the American West. July 13, 1882. Silverton, Colorado. Elevation 9,318 feet. Temperature at dawn 41 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun hasn't cleared the mountain peaks yet, but the Denver and Rio Grande yards are already alive with activity. A 280 locomotive, road number 168, sits at the ore-loading platform, releasing small puffs of steam into the thin mountain air. Its 8 44-inch driving wheels gleam with fresh graphite grease applied an hour before by the hostler. Behind the locomotive, 16 wooden ore cars painted Rio Grande yellow, each one rated for 5 tons of payload. The loading crews have already filled 14 of them with raw ore from the Silver Lake mine, dumped from wagons that climb down from mines even higher in the mountains. The math is simple and brutal. 80 tons of raw silver ore heading down a 45-mile track carved into canyon walls 200 feet above the Animas River. The engineer, a man named Thomas Wigglesworth, according to railroad payroll records dated July 1882, climbs into the cab. He's made this run 47 times since the line opened 5 days ago. 47 times in 5 days. That's the pace the San Juan Silver Boom demands, and the Denver and Rio Grande delivers. His fireman, John McKittrick, has already built the fire to 180 pounds per square inch of boiler pressure. The gauge reads steady. Everything is ready. At 6:47 a.m., Wigglesworth releases the brake and cracks the throttle. The locomotive's 2 leading wheels, the pony truck, in railroad parlance, pivot into the first curve as the train begins to move. The 8 driving wheels, arranged in 2 sets of 4 and all coupled together by side rods, bite into the rails with approximately 27,000 pounds of tractive effort. The sound is distinctive, the sharp exhaust bark of a heavily loaded steam locomotive beginning to roll. Not fast, never fast on these grades. The railroad's operating rules limit loaded ore trains to 12 miles per hour downhill. The curves are too tight and the consequences of a derailment too severe for any faster pace. But relentless, steady, dependable. The same locomotive will make this run again tomorrow and the day after, and 300 days a year for the next decade. By the time Wigglesworth pulls locomotive 168 into Durango at 4:15 that afternoon, his single train will have moved wealth equivalent to every stagecoach robbery in Arizona territory for an entire year. And Silverton runs 4 trains a day, every single day. The 280 Consolidation was born from a problem that had nothing to do with silver or the Rockies. It was about Pennsylvania coal. In 1866, the Lehigh and Mahanoy Railroad needed to move heavier trains through the anthracite fields. The existing 260 moguls couldn't pull enough. The 080 switchers had the muscle but derailed on curves. Baldwin Locomotive Works took a gamble. Add 2 leading wheels to the 080's frame for stability. Keep all 8 drivers coupled for maximum adhesion. The result could haul 40% more than a mogul while navigating tighter curves. Baldwin named it the Consolidation to commemorate the merger of several Pennsylvania coal lines. The name stuck to the wheel arrangement itself. By 1875, it had become America's standard heavy freight locomotive. The key was those 8 coupled drivers. Each driver added adhesive weight. The locomotive's mass pressing down through the wheels onto the rails. More adhesion meant more pulling power before the wheels slipped. The 2/8 rows relatively small drivers, typically 40 to 50 inches in diameter, sacrificed top speed for torque. Perfect for heavy trains at slow speeds, perfect for mountainous terrain, perfect for ore. William Jackson Palmer saw the future in 1870, and it was 3 feet wide. Palmer had just founded the Denver and Rio Grande Railway, with a vision that seemed insane to most railroad men. Build an entire network on narrow-gauge track. Standard gauge, 4 feet, 8.5 inches, was the American norm. But narrow gauge could be built for a fraction of the cost. Tighter curves, steeper grades, less earthwork. A study by the railway's engineers calculated construction costs at 37% less than standard gauge in mountainous terrain. The trade-off was speed and capacity. Narrow gauge cars carried less. Narrow gauge locomotives were smaller, but in 1870 there were no railroads in the Colorado Rockies at all. Palmer's bet was that something was better than nothing. By 1871, the Denver and Rio Grande's first narrow-gauge line connected Denver to Colorado Springs. The success was immediate. Other narrow-gauge lines followed. When silver was discovered at Leadville in 1879, the race was on. The Denver and Rio Grande pushed west from Alamosa, aiming for the San Juan Mountains. The San Juan district was a nightmare of logistics and a paradise of geology. Rich veins of silver ore ran through mountains that peaked above 14,000 feet. Pack mules could move maybe 400 pounds. Freight wagons on toll roads cost $18 per ton to reach Durango. At those rates, only the richest ores were worth hauling. The San Juan district needed a railroad or it would stay locked in the mountains. Palmer knew the prize was enormous. He also knew his board of directors might balk at the engineering challenge. So he kept the Silverton branch a secret. No photographs allowed until completion. Smart move. Images of narrow-gauge track clinging to a canyon wall 200 feet above a river might have raised questions about Palmer's sanity. Baldwin Locomotive Works delivered the narrow-gauge 280s that would make Palmer's vision work. These weren't the big mainline consolidations. These were compact machines built specifically for 3-foot track. The Denver and Rio Grande classified them with a letter C for consolidation, followed by a number. The C-16 class, built starting in 1881, weighed just under 100,000 pounds and developed roughly 27,000 pounds of tractive effort. Modest by standard gauge standards, massive for narrow gauge. The locomotive's boiler sat low between the frames to handle the sharp curves and reduce the center of gravity. The firebox burned Colorado coal, abundant, cheap, and hot enough to maintain steam pressure on long grades. The design prioritized reliability over elegance. Parts had to be simple enough to maintain in a mountain roundhouse 100 miles from a factory. Crew comfort was not a priority. Cabs were minimal. Visibility was everything. These locomotives were working machines for working men. The Denver and Rio Grande ordered them by the dozen. By 1884, the railroad operated over 1,600 miles of narrow-gauge track across Colorado and Utah, the largest narrow-gauge network in North America. Every mile of it depended on 2 8-mile consolidations to make the economics work. Those economics were staggering. Leadville alone produced over $11 million in silver in 1880. That's 1,300 tons of refined ore at contemporary prices. But refined ore was only part of the story. For every ton of refined silver, miners had to haul 20 to 40 tons of raw ore out of the mountains. Pack animals couldn't handle that volume. Wagons barely made a dent. Only railroads could move the tonnage required. Construction on the Silverton branch began in fall 1881. The Denver and Rio Grande hired civil engineer Alexander Hunt to survey the route up the Animas Canyon. Hunt's field notes, preserved in the railroad's archives at the Colorado Historical Society, document the challenge in precise terms: 45 miles of track through a gorge that narrowed to less than 80 feet at certain points. Cliffs rose vertically on one side. The river churned on the other. At milepost 479, a location that would later be called the High Line, the railroad would have to cling to a shelf 300 feet above the water. The solution was a granite ledge blasted into the canyon wall using black powder. Hundreds of workers, many of them Irish and Chinese immigrants, used hand drills to bore holes into solid rock. They packed the holes with explosives, retreated to safety, and blasted away tons of stone to create a shelf barely 14 feet wide, just enough for the roadbed and ballast. The work was dangerous. Company records show 6 men died in construction, accidents before the first train rolled. 3 from premature blasts, 2 from rock falls, 1 from drowning when he fell into the river, but the pace was brutal by necessity. Every day without a railroad cost the San Juan mines real money. Ore piled up at Silverton's loading platforms with nowhere to go except expensive wagon freight. Smelters in Durango sat idle, waiting for feed material to process. Mine owners who had invested hundreds of thousands in shaft development and stamp mills watched their capital sit unproductive. The economic pressure drove construction at a pace that would be considered reckless by today's standards. 7 months. Fall 1881 to July 1882. 45 miles of track through impossible terrain. The final spike was driven on July 10, 1882. Silverton's entire population turned out for the celebration, which lasted 3 days. By July 13th, just 3 days later, the first ore trains were running on a published schedule. The impact on Silverton's economy was immediate and measurable. Freight rates dropped by more than half overnight. An ore shipment that cost $18 per ton by wagon now cost $8 by rail. For a mine shipping 50 tons per day, that was $500 saved every single day. Lower costs meant lower-grade ores became profitable to mine. Veins that assayed at 40 ounces per ton were profitable by wagon. The railroad made veins as low as 20 ounces per ton worth working. Mines that couldn't cover their operating costs before the railroad suddenly turned positive. Within 3 years, San Juan County's documented mineral production hit $1 million annually. That's the assessed value recorded in county record. The actual production was certainly higher, as mine owners had incentives to underreport. By 1882, the San Juan district produced $20 million worth of ore, according to the United States Geological Survey's annual mineral report. One district, 1 year, $20 million. The Silverton Railroad was running 4 trains a day by August 1882, each one hauling 80 tons of ore down to Durango's smelters. Some basic arithmetic shows the scale. 4 trains times 80 tons equals 320 tons per day. Multiply by 300 operating days per year. The line shut down only during the worst winter storms, and you get 96,000 tons of ore moved annually on a single 45-mile branch line. At contemporary silver prices, averaging around $50 per ton for raw ore delivered to the smelter, that's $4.8 million worth of silver ore moved by rail each year. And that's just the Silverton branch. The Denver and Rio Grande operated similar branches to Ouray, Telluride, Rico, and later Creede. Each district had its own fleet of 2 8-nose hauling ore. Not every train made it. Snow avalanches were a constant threat on exposed sections of track above 10,000 feet. The winter of 1883-84 saw 16 separate avalanches block the line. The worst hit at Elk Park on January 22, 1884, burying 400 feet of track under 20 feet of snow and debris. Repair crews worked around the clock in sub-zero temperatures to clear the track. Each day of closure cost the mines thousands in lost shipments and the railroad thousands in lost revenue. The Elk Park slide took 4 days to clear. Floods were worse. The Animas River could rise 6 feet in a single day during spring runoff when warm weather melted the snowpack. In June 1885, A flood washed out 3 miles of track between Rockwood and Tacoma. The Denver and Rio Grande dispatched every available crew to the site with replacement ties, rails, and ballast. They had the line repaired in 11 days, a remarkable achievement for the era, but 11 days that left Silverton completely isolated by rail. Labor trouble hit the district in July 1884 when miners struck over wages. The mines demanded $3 per day for skilled miners. The owners offered $2.50. The strike lasted 3 weeks. During that time, the railroads kept running on schedule, but ore cars sat empty at the loading platforms. No ore meant no revenue. When the strike ended on July 20th with a compromise at $2.75, the backlog of ore waiting to ship was so severe that the Denver and Rio Grande added extra trains and ran them at night, using calcium lights to illuminate the track. The railroad had become more than transportation infrastructure. It was the economic lifeline. Everything flowed through it, ore going down, supplies going up, mail, passengers, mining machinery. A stamp mill weighing 5 tons could reach Silverton by rail in 1 day. By wagon, it took 2 weeks and cost triple. By 1887, the Denver and Rio Grande had extended narrow-gauge tracks to Ouray, 45 miles from the main line at Montrose. Otto Mears, known as the Pathfinder of the San Juans for his extensive toll road network, built additional narrow-gauge spurs, including the Rio Grande Southern, which connected Durango with Ridgeway via Rico and Telluride. The cumulative effect was a transportation web that opened territory previously accessible only by pack trail. Remote mining camps like Red Mountain and Sneffels suddenly had rail access. Gold production began to exceed silver by 1897. The Durango newspapers from that year, specifically the Durango Democrat, dated August 14, 1897, reported that mines in the Red Mountain district were producing ore so fast the railroad couldn't haul it quickly enough. The article noted that ore was accumulating at the Red Mountain loading platforms faster than the Denver and Rio Grande could supply empty cars. Think about that statement for a moment. The limiting factor in mountain mining wasn't finding ore. It wasn't extracting ore. It wasn't processing ore. It was moving ore. The bottleneck was the 280 consolidations and how many ore cars they could physically pull per trip up the 4% grades. By the mid-1890s, the Denver and Rio Grande was running double-headed trains, 2 locomotives coupled together as a single unit, to move heavier loads. 2 282s could pull 30 ore cars instead of 16, nearly doubling the payload per train. The mathematics of mining economics made every ton count. A mine operating on 5% net margins needed volume to survive. Volume required transportation. Transportation required locomotives. The connection was direct and unbreakable. Let's return to those stagecoach robberies for detailed perspective. Wells Fargo's own internal report, compiled by Chief Detective James B. Hume and Special Agent John N. Thacker and published January 1, 1885, documented 313 stagecoach robberies against their company between 1870 and 1884. The report listed each incident, but focused mainly on physical descriptions of the robbers for wanted posters. It did not calculate total losses, but fragmentary records from court cases and newspaper accounts allow some estimation. The most successful stage robber was Charles Blackbart Bowles, who hit 28 Wells Fargo coaches between 1875 and 1883. His total take, according to trial testimony when he was finally caught in November 1883, was approximately $1 million in current value after adjusting for inflation. Most of his robberies netted only a few hundred to a few $1,000s. His first robbery on July 26, 1875, yielded just $160, about $5,200 in today's currency. The Canyon Springs robbery on September 26, 1878, remains the most lucrative single stagecoach heist in Western history. A gang led by a man named Johnny intercepted an armored stagecoach called the Monitor, literally an iron-plated coach built to resist robbery, and made off with an estimated $2 million in gold bullion being shipped from the Homestake mine. Only 60% of the stolen gold was ever recovered. If the estimates are accurate, about $800,000 in gold remains buried somewhere near Canyon Springs, South Dakota. Arizona Territory recorded 129 stage robberies between 1875 and 1903, according to research by historian Marshall Trimble. Of the approximately 200 individuals who engaged in stage robbery in Arizona, only 80 have been positively identified. The rest remain unknown because more than half of all stage robberies were never solved. Most Arizona robberies netted between a few hundred and a few $1,000s. The typical strongbox held payrolls for mining camps, which meant cash in the range of $500 to $3,000 depending on the size of the operation. Add California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Texas, and the total number of documented stagecoach robberies in the West between 1870 and 1900 probably exceeds 450. Total take for all robberies across the entire American West during the 3-decade silver boom era. Optimistically, maybe $10 million. More realistically, $5 to $7 million. Many robberies yielded almost nothing because express companies learned to ship large values infrequently and unpredictably, using decoy coaches and armed guards. The last stagecoach robbery in American history occurred on December 5, 1916, near Jarbidge, Nevada. The robber, Ben Cool, killed the driver and stole $4,000 in cash. He became the first person in United States history convicted of murder based on palm print evidence. By 1916, stagecoaches had become obsolete, replaced entirely by railroads and motor vehicles. The era of the road agent had ended not because of better law enforcement, but because the target disappeared. Now compare those numbers to railroad ore shipments. The Silverton branch alone, just one line, 45 miles long, hauled over $300 million in precious metals during its first 4 decades of operation, according to estimates compiled by the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad Museum using historical shipping records. That's not the Denver and Rio Grande system, not even Colorado as a whole, just the Durango to Silverton branch. $300 million. By 1884, the Denver and Rio Grande operated 1,600 miles of narrow-gauge track connecting multiple mining districts. The Leadville district, served by D&RG Narrow Gauge, produced over $11 million worth of silver in 1880 alone. Between 1879 and 1893, Leadville produced 240 million troy ounces of silver, according to United States Geological Survey records, worth over $82 million at contemporary prices. Every ounce of that silver rode to market on narrow-gauge trains, pulled by 280 consolidations. The Aspen district, connected by rail in 1887, produced another 80 million troy ounces of silver through 1983. The Creede district, reached by the Denver and Rio Grande in 1891, produced heavily until 1985. The cumulative tonnage moved by narrow-gauge ore trains in Colorado between 1880 and 1920 measured in the hundreds of millions of ton-miles. 1 ton moved 1 mile equals 1 ton-mile. Move 80 tons 45 miles, and you've generated 3,600 ton-miles. Do that 4 times a day for 300 days, and you get 4.32 million ton-miles annually on a single branch. Scale that across the entire Denver and Rio Grande narrow-gauge network, 1,600 miles of track, dozens of mining districts, thousands of trains per year, and the numbers become astronomical. The wealth moved by 280 consolidations dwarfs every stagecoach robbery in American history by a factor exceeding 100 to 1, probably closer to 200 to 1 if you account for unreported mine production and conservative estimation methods. Yet Hollywood made dozens of films about Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, and exactly zero about the locomotive engineers who moved more wealth in a month than outlaws stole in their entire careers. There's no movie called Thomas Wigglesworth and the Silver-Tongued Kid. Nobody wrote dime novels about firemen shoveling coal on the High Line. The disparity reveals something fundamental about how human beings remember history. The discrepancy reveals something fundamental about how we remember history. Stagecoach robberies were dramatic, violent, and personal. A masked man with a gun makes a good story. A locomotive hauling ore makes a better economy. One creates legends, the other creates cities. Durango was founded by the Denver and Rio Grande Railway in 1880, specifically to serve as a smelter town and division point. The town exists because the railroad needed it. Silverton's population doubled within 3 years of the railroad's arrival. Not because of silver itself, silver had been there all along, but because the railroad made it economically viable to extract it. The 280 Consolidation was the machine that made this possible. Its design wasn't revolutionary, it was incremental. Take existing technology, combine elements intelligently, optimize for a specific task. The result was a locomotive that could reliably haul heavy trains up steep grades at slow speeds. Nothing fancy, just effective. Over 23,000 280 Consolidations were built in the United States, more than any other single-wheel arrangement in American railroad history. They worked everywhere: coal mines in Pennsylvania, ore districts in Colorado, timber operations in the Pacific Northwest, freight service on branch lines across the country. Most lasted into the 1950s. Many worked into the 1960s. The Durango and Silverton line still runs 280s today, though now they haul tourists instead of ore. The story we tell about the Wild West emphasizes individuals: gunfighters, outlaws, lawmen, prospectors, men who made their fortunes or their reputations through personal action. The actual West was built by systems: mining companies, smelters, railroads, capital markets. The romance is in the lone prospector striking it rich. The reality is in the tonnage reports. Consider what it took to extract silver from the San Juans. First, locate the vein, then sink a shaft, often hundreds of feet deep through granite. Extract the ore. Crush it in a stamp mill. Machines weighing multiple tons, powered by steam, operating 24 hours a day. Transport the crushed ore to a smelter. Smelt it at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. Refine the resulting bullion. Ship it to a mint. Every step required industrial-scale infrastructure. Every step required capital. Every step required transportation. The 280 was just one component of a larger system, but it was the indispensable component. Without railroads, the Colorado silver boom would have been a tenth the size. The mines would have focused only on the richest veins. The low-grade ores that made up 90% of the volume would have stayed in the ground. The wealth would have remained locked in the mountains, visible but inaccessible. The Consolidation unlocked it. The myth of the Wild West is fundamentally about freedom: wide-open spaces, no rules, every man for himself. The reality of the Wild West was fundamentally about logistics. How do you move bulk materials through difficult terrain at a profit? The mythic West had showdowns at high noon. The real West had train schedules, freight tariffs, and tonnage quotas. One makes better cinema, the other made more millionaires. By 1893, silver prices collapsed after Congress repealed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. Overnight, mines across Colorado shut down. The Denver and Rio Grande watched its ore traffic evaporate. Silverton, which had boomed to a population of 2,000, saw half its residents leave within a year. The 280 Consolidations kept running, but now they hauled supplies and passengers instead of ore. Many narrow-gauge branches were abandoned entirely. Others converted to standard gauge. The economic logic that built them had reversed. Without ore revenue, the maintenance costs couldn't be justified. but the infrastructure remained. The ledge carved into the Animas Canyon wall is still there. The grade cut through the mountain passes is still there. The right-of-way through the valleys is still there. When gold replaced silver as the primary mineral, the same railroads carried it. When uranium became valuable during World War II, the same tracks hauled it. The system persisted even as its purpose changed. The Durango and Silverton line never stopped running. It shifted from freight to tourism, from ore to passengers, from economic necessity to historical preservation. Today, it's a national historic landmark. Tourists pay $200 to ride the same track that Thomas Wigglesworth ran in 1882. They see the canyon walls, the river below, the impossible engineering. What they don't see is the 70 billion pounds of ore that moved down those tracks over 4 decades. They don't see the economic engine that turned mountain rock into American wealth. They see a quaint steam train through pretty scenery. They don't see the Consolidation for what it actually was, the machine that built the modern West. In 1882, the San Juan district produced $20 million in ore. That same year, Wells Fargo recorded 42 stagecoach robberies nationwide. If every single robbery netted a wildly generous $10,000, most took far less. The total stolen was $420,000. The railroad moved 50 times more wealth in 1 year than Outlaw stole in 50 years. The 280 Consolidation was never famous. No dime novels were written about it. No legends attached to its engineers. It simply worked, day after day, year after year, moving the tonnage that built cities and funded territories and eventually made Colorado a state. The real iron horse of the American West wasn't a myth, it was a machine. 8 coupled driving wheels, 44 inches in diameter, 27,000 pounds of tractive effort, 12 miles per hour up a 4% grade with 80 tons behind it. The numbers don't lie. The West wasn't won at gunpoint. It was won by the ton.